of how has the church in her wisdom throughout 2,000 years dealt with chaos or with discord. I cannot begin to tell you how many phone calls per week I am currently getting from groups who say to me now, how can we have apostolic succession? How can we become a part of this excitement that is emerging called Anglicanism? It's astounding. I can't even begin to tell you what's happening. The most remarkable one recently was when I was told at the clinic that several rabbis were there to see me. Yeah, that's nice. I mean, it'll be kind of fun to see a few rabbis. Well, when they walked in and they said, "Glory to Jesus Christ," I had a hunch that they probably weren't, at Temple Beth Israel. So, as we started to talk, and the drama unfolded, here's the way it kind of went. We are Messianic Jews. We are completed Jews. We believe Jesus Christ, Yeshua, is Messiah. I believe that Jesus is, in fact, Messiah. He's the Christos. And yet they say, when we went to get our training, we wound up in Calvinist institutions. And we discovered that that theological tradition and that liturgical tradition are kind of inconsistent with our understanding of our tradition. And so we've discovered that we need to be trained and be a part of a liturgical tradition that isn't so overtly Western that it doesn't acknowledge its Semitic and Eastern roots. Now, what do you think, folks? I can hear some people saying now, is that kosher? And what I have to say to you is that it has some anomalous elements to it, and I will probably not see how all this works out. But I'm pretty excited to be a part of this process that might lead potentially to this kind of work. Was this a quirk? Or is this of the Holy Spirit? I mean, after all, God knows my predisposition. Send some exotic Eastern right in and I'll sit down and talk with him. It would be much easier for me to have a conversation and talk about how we can work together. No, the Lord's sending groups that require my doing a little bit of thinking, a little bit of stretching so that I can understand what our parameters are. That's what we're engaged in. So I have to say, serving in the ACNA's task force for ecumenism and also for prayer book and liturgy has been quite extraordinary. Also on the ecumenical front and the liturgical front is the following. If I really do care, that is, say, if we care about what the East and the West think about our ways of being church, wouldn't it make sense for them to check out the text that we're working on before we publish it? And so that's what we're doing. The West and the East are reviewing those things when we get to it that we've been working on to make sure that it's consistent with the understanding. So when, down the road, down the trail, the whenever, a greater sense of reunion might be possible, we will have done so on the basis of a mutual respect. Instead of the usual way of doing business, which goes a bit like this. Hey, we just had our convention. You'll love what we passed. Yeah, we refuted everything you and I have ever agreed on. It's wonderful. We know you'll want to have more of this, more dialogue. There cannot be dialogue unless there's mutual respect. And mutual respect comes from trust. And trust comes from love. In other words, comes from God. This is all Holy Spirit led. Now I want to bring us into the next reality of ecclesiology, and it's oftentimes the conversation I have to have with church growth people. The more traditional Anglicans like to talk about apostolic succession, and the more church growth-oriented people like to talk about apostolic success. So the question is, how do we get the two and blend them together? Well, it's not all that difficult. First of all, the incredible experience that has taken place in Wheaton College, one group eventually making their way to Eastern Orthodoxy and another group making their way to Anglicanism, is somewhat extraordinary when you spend time talking with the pilgrimages that all of the folks along those trails have made. It's because they want something that is greater than their own personal history. They want something other than the limited history that they have. They want to be connected in a historical way with something that is much bigger, more mystical, and deeper, that operates on the level that I've been talking with you about, as it relates to root metaphor, as it relates to symbol, as it relates to sign. Now, one of the things that oftentimes happens with this church growth model of which I'm speaking is that there are those who would be what I would call self-styled church planters. And then there will be those who would style themselves as first-rate church maintainers, or as I've indicated you, first-rate church survivors. And the problem is when these various traditional types, if you will, orthodox types, aren't spending more time together. What I mean is, I have met some remarkable church planters who are really not what I would have awarded an A+ in pastoral care. And there are some remarkable folks who would get an A+ in pastoral care, but they wouldn't know how to start a church if they bumped into one. Their idea of starting a church is buying a building first. What I mean by that is there is something here to be learned in this magnificent opportunity that has been placed before us for the future. We have been given the opportunity for the pooling of knowledge, resource, and gifts like we've never, ever, ever had before. We are not on a jog by ourselves. We are walking and running and moving along a path that carries with it, I think, some of the most exciting possibilities for the future. And that's the reason why I've used none of my notes today that I had written out, because they're irrelevant based on what I really perceive is happening. Here's what I mean. I think that what we're currently engaged in is an imperfect reality. And I'm so grateful for that. I'm so nervous being around people who think they've discovered the perfect solution, unless they say that his name is Jesus. That's the only perfect solution, is Jesus. It's the only perfect solution. And the question is, how do we tap into his perfectness, his absolute infallibility, his absolute total sacrificial love for us?